Long before insulated homes, central heating, and fleece blankets, winter was a silent enemy, creeping into the bones, seeping through stone walls, and reminding humanity of nature's unforgiving side. In the ancient world, warmth wasn't a guarantee. It was a privilege, a daily battle, and often a test of ingenuity. Today, we might adjust a thermostat or light a scented candle, but 2,000 years ago, people relied on strange rituals, risky inventions, and the power of pure imagination just to stop shivering. The cold could bring sickness, famine, and despair, but it also brought out a kind of creative desperation that led to some of the most fascinating and downright bizarre methods of keeping warm. These weren't just practical solutions, they were cultural statements, revealing what ancient people valued, feared, and believed. From sleeping with animals to wearing absurd layers of organic material to bathing in bizarre brews of animal fat and ashes, the story of warmth in the ancient world is both oddly touching and wonderfully strange. Imagine an Iron Age family huddled in a smoky hut, surrounded by low walls made of mud and straw. Outside, snow covers the earth in silence. Inside, a small fire flickers weakly in the center of the room, its light the only defense against darkness. The air is thick with smoke because there's no chimney, only a small hole in the roof. Everyone, humans, goats, chickens, share the same space because every breath, every body, contributes to the warmth. The smell is unbearable, but so is the cold outside. This was winter, raw, real, and unrelenting. In other parts of the world, different civilizations came up with their own ways to fight the cold. The Romans, with their love for engineering, invented heated floors and bathhouses where steam and luxury replaced shivering. Meanwhile, in the Far East, people found comfort in glowing pots of embers hidden beneath tables or robes. And in northern tribes, people coated themselves in animal fat, not out of vanity, but as a kind of primitive insulation. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. What makes these methods fascinating is not just their effectiveness, but their reflection of human adaptability. The ancient world lacked the conveniences we take for granted, but people were endlessly resourceful. A frozen winter wasn't just endured, it was tamed through ritual, craftsmanship, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. As we explore these strange, sometimes ingenious practices, remember that behind every odd method was a simple, universal desire: comfort. The same longing you feel when you curl up under a blanket was felt by a peasant in medieval Europe or a nomad in ancient Mongolia. Across time and place, the pursuit of warmth has always been a shared human experience. So, let's step back in time to a world of fur, fire, fat, and faith, and uncover the oddest ways people tried to stay warm in winter. Some methods will make you smile, some will make you shiver, and some might even make you grateful for the modern miracles of heating and hot cocoa. Let's begin. Section 1: Animal Companions, the living blankets of history. Before the age of quilts and radiators, the warmest thing available wasn't fabric or fire, it was flesh and fur. Across ancient civilizations, humans quickly learned that warmth could be shared. Animals weren't just a source of food or labor, they were natural heaters. And so, in long freezing winters, people began to rely on their beasts for warmth in ways that ranged from practical to downright peculiar. In the cold stone huts of ancient Europe, it wasn't uncommon for families to share their living quarters with livestock. Sheep, goats, pigs, and even chickens would sleep indoors. Their combined body heat could raise the temperature of a small hut by several degrees, enough to make a brutal winter night survivable. The family might be covered in soot and surrounded by noise, but compared to the biting cold outside, this communal closeness felt like a blessing. The Norse, who faced some of the harshest winters in the world, took this idea to another level. In early Scandinavian homes, the animals often occupied a lower level, while the humans slept on a raised platform above them. The heat from the livestock rose through the floorboards, creating a kind of natural underfloor heating system, centuries before the Romans popularized their hypocausts. Meanwhile, in the steppes of Central Asia, nomads would bring their horses into large communal tents when temperatures plummeted. Horses generate immense warmth. Standing next to one on a cold day feels like being near a furnace. Some accounts even suggest warriors sleeping under their horse's blanket, or using animal hides still warm from the hunt as makeshift sleeping bags. In the ancient Middle East, cats, long before they became symbols of luxury and grace, were prized for their warmth and pest control. Egyptian households kept them close not just to guard grain stores, but to curl up beside them during chilly desert nights. Their habit of finding the warmest spot in the room made them perfect little companions for humans seeking comfort. But the strangest example might come from the Andes. In high-altitude villages where temperatures dropped below freezing even in daylight, locals would sleep with guinea pigs, dozens of them, inside small clay huts. These tiny animals, kept in large numbers, acted like little heaters. Their combined warmth was surprisingly effective, and in return, they provided food when winter dragged on too long. To modern ears, the thought of sleeping with livestock sounds unthinkable, maybe even repulsive. But in the ancient world, it was normal, even life-saving. The bond between humans and animals was built not just on companionship, but on mutual survival. In the darkest, coldest months, warmth became a shared responsibility. And while it might have smelled terrible, it worked. Section 2. Fires, Smoke, and Strange Heating Hacks of the Ancient World. If there's one thing that defined the ancient battle against winter, it was fire, mankind's oldest and most loyal companion. But how fire was used, controlled, and even misused varied wildly from place to place. And when wood was scarce, creativity had to fill the gap. From smoky huts to bizarre fuels, the quest for warmth produced some of the strangest heating methods you could imagine. Picture a Bronze Age home, a simple round hut made of mud and reeds, with a small pit in the center holding a flickering fire. There's no chimney, no vent, no fancy flue system. The smoke from the flames fills the room, curling toward the thatched roof and seeping out through cracks in the walls. The air inside is thick and dark, but it's warm enough to survive. Families would sit or lie close to the fire, their faces red from heat and eyes stinging from the smoke. It wasn't pleasant, but comfort and convenience were two very different things in the ancient world. In fact, historians believe that the smoky interiors of prehistoric homes might have actually extended people's lives in a strange way. The constant coating of soot on ceilings and walls acted as insulation, keeping heat trapped longer. Even clothing would absorb that smoky layer, turning garments into reluctant heaters. People smelled perpetually of campfire, but the scent was the perfume of survival. As civilization evolved, so did humanity's mastery of fire. The ancient Romans, famous for their engineering brilliance, developed something revolutionary, the hypocaust system. It was essentially central heating before its time. Beneath the floors of villas and bathhouses ran a network of hollow spaces. Slaves would stoke fires in a nearby furnace, and the hot air would circulate under the floors and up through the walls, warming rooms above. It was ingenious, though the maintenance was grueling and dangerous. A single mistake in ventilation could suffocate the workers or fill rooms with deadly fumes. Still, the luxury of a heated floor was irresistible. Wealthy Romans would even boast about the comfort of walking barefoot in winter, a symbol of power that was literally built on the sweat and smoke of others. Far from Rome's marble baths, in colder regions like northern Europe, fires were far less elegant. The longhouses of the Vikings and Celts had central hearths with open flames and no chimneys at all. Smoke would linger thickly under the roof beams, escaping only through small holes or gaps. In winter, the haze was constant, staining the wood black and making everyone's lungs ache. But that same smoke also kept insects away, preserved meat hanging from the rafters, and, strangely enough, waterproofed the roof by coating it with a layer of tarry soot. Meanwhile, in Asia, people found more refined and more unusual ways to stay warm. In ancient China and Japan, braziers were common, metal or clay bowls filled with glowing coals that families gathered around like miniature hearths. The Japanese later perfected the kotatsu, a low wooden table draped with a heavy quilt under which sat a pot of burning embers. Families would sit with their legs tucked beneath the blanket, sharing stories, food, and warmth. The idea survives to this day, though thankfully, modern ones are powered by electricity rather than fire. Fuel shortages often pushed people into desperate measures. In parts of Europe and the Middle East, dried animal dung was used as a primary fuel source. It burned slowly and produced little flame, but enough heat to cook food and warm small spaces. Villagers would collect and dry it in the sun, shaping it into bricks or discs. The smell was, as you might guess, far from pleasant, but in the dead of winter, practicality always trumped comfort. And then there was the curious Roman invention called the hand warmer of ashes. Wealthy citizens sometimes carried small metal pots filled with hot coals or ashes tucked beneath their robes. The warmth radiated up through their garments as they walked through chilly streets. It sounds sophisticated, but it was risky. A gust of wind, a stumble, or an inattentive slave could turn a cozy stroll into a painful burn. In medieval monasteries, monks relied on another strange trick. Their thick stone walls held the chill like a tomb, so they often used the warming room, a single chamber where a fire burned constantly. The monks would take turns entering to thaw their stiff hands before returning to cold scriptoria to write and pray. Some monasteries even heated stones near the fire, wrapping them in cloth and placing them under robes or blankets. Early hot stones, early hot water bottles. The principle hasn't changed in 2,000 years. Fire was sacred, temperamental, and essential. It symbolized both life and danger, and in many ancient cultures, it was treated with awe. People prayed to fire gods, made offerings to hearth deities, and never let the flames go out during winter. In Greece, the goddess Hestia was said to guard the hearth, while in Rome, her counterpart Vesta had priestesses, the Vestal Virgins, whose duty was to keep the sacred flame of the city burning eternally. To let it die was considered an omen of disaster. The strange heating hacks of history remind us that fire wasn't just warmth. It was civilization itself. Whether in a smoky hut or a marble bathhouse, it was the heartbeat of home, the flicker of life against the cold vastness of winter. Section 3. Layers, furs, and fashioned warmth. What people wore to survive the cold, when fire wasn't enough, or when it simply wasn't available. Warmth had to be worn. Across the ancient world, clothing wasn't just about modesty or status. It was a literal barrier between life and death. Every region, every era, every class found unique ways to turn animal skin, fabric, and ingenuity into armor against winter's bite. And some of those methods were surprisingly clever, others downright bizarre. Let's start in prehistoric Europe, where warmth came from what could be hunted. The earliest jackets were stitched together from the furs of animals like reindeer, wolves, or bears. Hunters wore the hides fur side inward, trapping heat more efficiently against the body. Over time, they learned to layer an inner wrap of soft skin, an outer coat of coarser fur, and sometimes even dried moss or grass tucked in between for extra insulation. The result wasn't elegant, but it worked. A well-made reindeer cloak could keep someone alive through brutal northern winters, where the air froze in your beard before sunrise. By the time of ancient Greece, the concept of layered clothing had evolved into something more refined. Greek winters weren't Arctic, but the stone houses and mountain winds could chill to the bone. People often wore multiple tunics, thin linen for comfort, heavier wool for warmth, and wrapped themselves in large rectangular cloaks called himation. The wealthy sometimes had theirs lined with fur, while poorer citizens reused old garments, layering until they looked like walking bundles of fabric. Interestingly, Greeks believed that cold air was unhealthy, that it could disturb the balance of the body's humors, so even moderate winter weather was treated with caution. Meanwhile, the Romans took things further, because, as with most Roman habits, everything had to be done with structure and purpose. Roman soldiers, stationed in cold provinces like Britannia or Germania, had to adapt fast. Their famous tunics, short-sleeved and knee-length, were no match for frost, so they layered thick woolen cloaks called sagum or painula, sometimes waxed or oiled to repel rain. Soldiers also wrapped strips of cloth around their legs, the earliest form of leggings, to protect from the cold. Archaeologists even found evidence that Roman troops wore socks with sandals. The image of stoic warriors marching in sandal socks may seem funny now, but it was simply practical. The human body doesn't care much for pride when frostbite is involved. In the far north, the Norse and other Scandinavian peoples developed clothing so perfectly adapted to the cold that even modern designers marvel at it. Vikings wore layered wool garments beneath cloaks made of sheepskin or seal fur. The key was lanolin, the natural oil in wool, which repelled water and kept warmth even when damp. Women spun and wove these heavy fabrics through winter, using looms that filled longhouses with rhythmic clacking sounds. Every thread woven was an act of survival. They even lined their boots with hay or dried grass to create insulation, a primitive but effective version of thermal socks. But perhaps the most interesting early winter clothing came from the East. In ancient China, the wealthy wore long robes made of silk, padded with cotton or even fine wool from Central Asia. The truly rich lined their garments with fur from exotic animals, fox, ermine, or sable, not only for warmth, but as a symbol of refinement. Peasants, however, relied on practical layering, hemp or ramie underclothes, topped with thick, quilted coats. When temperatures dropped sharply, they stuffed straw between layers of fabric, a crude but functional form of padding that tracked heat and cost almost nothing. In colder mountainous regions like Tibet and Mongolia, winter wear had its own strange artistry. Herdsmen used the skins of yaks and sheep to make heavy robes that wrapped around the body and tied at the waist with thick belts. Because heat loss from the head is significant, elaborate fur hats became essential. Mongolian headgear was often high, conical, and richly decorated, doubling as a badge of identity and protection from bitter winds. Travelers noted that when the firewood ran out, these people would wrap their heads completely, leaving only their eyes visible, a human cocoon against the frozen plains. In medieval Europe, the art of warmth through clothing reached new and occasionally ridiculous heights. People wore multiple layers of everything: linen shirts, wool tunics, long cloaks, padded doublets. Even bedwear was elaborate. Men and women often slept fully dressed, wrapping extra fabrics around their heads and necks. Wealthy nobles used fur almost like insulation, lining sleeves, collars, and even the edges of shoes. Furs were ranked by luxury. Squirrel, ermine, and marten were prized above all. Yet not everyone could afford this. The poor improvised, stuffing straw or even rags inside their clothing for padding. In extreme cold, they wrapped their feet in cloth and tied them with rope, a humble form of makeshift boots. But some historical fashion choices were downright strange. In the 16th century, for example, people in parts of Eastern Europe wore heated corsets, bodices with small metal pockets that could hold warmed stones or bits of charcoal. The idea was clever, but occasionally disastrous when a coal shifted and scorched the wearer. In ancient Japan, samurai and nobles sometimes wore multiple silk layers, not just for beauty, but for warmth. The tightly woven fabric trapped air, creating a surprising insulation effect. One of the most curious winter fashion traditions, though, came from Russia. The valenki, felted wool boots that were molded into shape using hot water and pressure. They became so effective at keeping out the cold that soldiers and peasants alike swore by them for centuries. Even today, they're still worn in Siberia, a timeless echo of ancient warmth. Ultimately, the history of cold weather clothing reveals something deeply human, that warmth isn't just about temperature, but about resourcefulness. Ancient people transformed their surroundings, animals, plants, even the earth's fibers, into shields against nature. Every stitch, every fur, every bundle of straw, tucked beneath a cloak, was a small triumph against the winter's dominion. It wasn't fashion in the modern sense. It was life disguised as style. Section 4. Sleeping warm. Nighttime tricks against the cold. As daylight faded and the fires burned low, the real challenge began. Staying warm while awake was one thing. Staying warm while asleep, motionless and vulnerable, was another. For most of history, night was when people truly felt winter's weight pressing down on them. But human ingenuity, as always, found ways to adapt. Across centuries and continents, people learned clever, strange, and sometimes uncomfortable methods to keep the chill at bay through the long, dark hours. In the Roman world, sleep itself was often an affair shaped by temperature. The wealthy might have thick blankets of wool or woven linen, but many ordinary Romans had little more than rough cloth or animal hides. In the colder provinces, people slept close together for warmth, often with servants or even animals nearby. Archaeological evidence from ancient villas suggests that small clay hand warmers and foot warmers were used before bed. These were filled with hot ashes or coals, then placed beneath the bedding, a delicate balance between heat and danger. Too much warmth, and the bedding could smolder. Too little, and the cold would bite until morning. Meanwhile, in northern Europe, medieval peasants turned their homes themselves into sleeping chambers. The main source of heat was often the same fire used for cooking, left smoldering through the night. Beds were built near hearths whenever possible, and in some homes, families even slept inside alcove beds, small wooden boxes built into the wall. These box beds could be closed with shutters or curtains, trapping heat like a personal cocoon. Inside, straw mattresses and furs added insulation. The air inside those sleeping boxes was stuffy and smoky, but compared to the icy air outside, it felt like luxury. In colder regions like Scandinavia or the Alps, people developed an even cozier idea: the family bed. Everyone, from grandparents to toddlers, would sleep together under layers of wool and fur. Sometimes the animals joined too, especially young calves or goats that needed warmth. It might sound crowded, but it was practical. Every shared breath helped raise the temperature. The practice even shaped old sayings: to be worth one's salt, or to keep the hearth warm, often referred not just to work or food, but to the ability to preserve warmth for others. In medieval England and France, bed design itself evolved for warmth. The feather bed, an invention of comfort and status, appeared around the 14th century. Instead of lying on hard boards or straw, the wealthy sank into cushions filled with down or feathers, which trapped body heat efficiently. Servants would warm the bed before their masters lay down, often by placing a pan of hot coals beneath the covers. The practice was comforting, but risky. There are accounts of sheets catching fire or smoldering through the night, forcing people to leap from their beds half asleep and terrified. Still, it was considered an essential luxury of the season. In ancient China, another innovation emerged: the Kong, a heated brick platform that doubled as a bed. This clever structure ran smoke channels beneath a raised surface, carrying heat from a stove through hollow passages under the sleeping area. The bricks absorbed warmth during cooking hours, slowly releasing it through the night. Even in the dead of winter, people could sleep comfortably on the Kong's smooth surface, wrapped in thick cotton quilts. It was a marvel of early engineering, simple, efficient, and centuries ahead of its time. Japan had its own version of winter sleeping wisdom, the kotatsu. Though now associated with tea and relaxation, its earliest form was a hearth sunk into the floor, covered by a quilt. Families would sit around it by day, and, at night, bring the quilt to bed for extra warmth. Futons were placed on tatami mats, sometimes stacked to create distance from the cold floor. The Japanese, who valued harmony with nature, preferred warmth that came from softness and shared comfort rather than heavy fires. It was less about conquering the cold and more about coexisting with it peacefully. In places where firewood was scarce, like desert regions or treeless plains, people turned to other means. In the Middle East and parts of North Africa, households relied on heat stones, flat stones heated by day and wrapped in cloth to serve as bed warmers by night. Nomadic tribes often slept beside their camels or under thick felt tents that retained heat through body warmth. Wool blankets were layered in surprising numbers, sometimes 10 or more in particularly cold nights, to trap air between each fold. Every layer counted. Even stranger were the remedies of the medieval period in Europe, when superstition and practicality mingled freely. It was believed that rubbing one's feet with goose fat or badger grease before bed could seal in the body's heat. Others swore by placing onions, herbs, or even warm bread near the skin to maintain warmth. Herbalists suggested carrying sprigs of rosemary or cloves in a pouch near the chest, not because they generated heat, but because they warmed the spirits. In an age when science and mysticism were siblings, any comfort felt like wisdom. There's also something quietly touching about how communities used warmth as connection. In rural villages, it was common for neighbors to share fires or sleeping quarters during harsh winters. Strangers traveling long distances were offered spots near the hearth, not out of luxury, but survival. Warmth was humanity's oldest shared resource. To deny it would have been unthinkable. As the centuries passed, sleeping habits slowly changed, but the search for warmth remained constant. From hot bricks tucked under blankets in ancient China to the closed box beds of medieval Europe, every culture found ways to keep the cold from creeping into dreams. Some used ingenuity, others superstition, but all carried the same quiet hope that they would wake safely to see the sun rise again. For in the silent hours of the night, when frost thickened on the window and wind whispered through the cracks, warmth wasn't just comfort, it was a promise that life, despite the cold, would endure until morning. Section 5. Warming from the inside. Strange foods and drinks against the cold. When the nights grew long and frost began to gather on every wooden beam and stone floor, warmth was no longer just a matter of shelter. It became something people tried to eat and drink into their bones. Long before electric heaters or steaming radiators, our ancestors relied on food as their most reliable source of heat. Across the ancient and medieval world, people developed ingenious, and sometimes downright odd, ways of fueling themselves from within, using spices, fermented drinks, and hearty concoctions to trick the body into feeling warmer. In ancient Greece and Rome, winter cuisine wasn't just about nourishment, it was about balance. The physician Hippocrates taught that warmth came from within, from a proper balance of hot and cold humors in the body. To counteract the chill, one had to eat foods considered hot in nature. This didn't mean temperature, it meant temperament. Garlic, onions, mustard, and pepper were prized for their supposed ability to stoke inner fire. Romans also adored mulsum, a sweet mixture of wine and honey, often served warm. It soothed the throat and, more importantly, gave the illusion of gentle heat spreading through the body. For the poorer citizens, the same principle applied with simpler fare. Lentils, beans, and barley soups simmered in clay pots all day, their steam filling small homes. Soldiers on the Roman frontier even carried small portable kettles to brew posca, a sour drink made of vinegar, water, and herbs. It was refreshing in the heat, but in winter they'd add honey and warm it over the fire. The sour tang, combined with warmth, seemed to awaken the senses and the spirit. Farther north, where winters were far harsher, medieval Europeans turned to hardier and stranger fare. In the British Isles, warming foods meant pottage, a thick, bubbling stew that might include barley, herbs, and whatever meat or vegetables were available. During the coldest months, families would keep the same pot simmering day after day, adding ingredients as needed. This was called perpetual stew, and it could last for weeks. The result was a dish that evolved over time, a living, breathing broth that absorbed every flavor and story of the season. In Eastern Europe, fermented foods like sauerkraut and kvass were seen as lifesavers in winter. Fermentation not only preserved food but was believed to ignite inner heat. The tangy, fizzy nature of these foods made them stimulating, a jolt to the sluggish, cold body. Russian peasants, for instance, drank warm kvass, a mild beer made from rye bread, before bed to keep the chest hot. They also consumed garlic vodka or pepper mead. Spicy drinks fought to protect against both chills and illness. Meanwhile, in Asia, entire cuisines evolved around the idea of thermal balance. In ancient China, winter meals were guided by the principles of yin and yang, cold and hot energies that had to stay in harmony. To ward off the cold, yang foods were encouraged: lamb, ginger, cinnamon, garlic, and chili. One famous dish, hot pot, traces its roots back over 2,000 years to the Han Dynasty. Diners would gather around a simmering pot of broth, cooking thin slices of meat and vegetables at the table. The steam, aroma, and shared heat turned the meal into both a culinary and social ritual, a communal shield against the frost outside. In Japan, a similar philosophy guided winter eating. People consumed miso soup, rich in fermented paste, to awaken the body's fire. Hot rice wine, or sake, was gently heated before drinking. Its warmth wasn't just physical, it was emotional, connecting people through quiet evenings of storytelling and shared cups. Even today, that tradition continues. The act of sipping something warm in winter feels timeless, grounding, almost sacred. But not all ancient warming foods were comforting. In medieval Europe, especially in the colder northern regions, some recipes bordered on strange. To heat the blood, people sometimes consumed spiced ale thickened with egg yolks, or wine mixed with peppercorns and mustard seeds. Wealthier households might enjoy hippocras, a blend of red wine, sugar, and exotic spices like cinnamon and cloves. It was believed not only to warm the stomach, but to sharpen wit and courage. Knights and nobles drank it before battle or feasting, while commoners made humbler versions using local herbs like nettle and yarrow. Another unusual method of eating warmth came from the belief that certain animals carried natural heat. Medieval herbalists recommended eating rooster meat over hen in winter because the rooster's nature burns hotter. Deer and boar were also prized for their fiery temperament, and in colder regions of Asia and Eastern Europe, bear fat and seal oil were used in cooking, both for their energy content and their mythical heat-giving powers. In times of deep hardship, when wood was scarce and food stores ran low, people turned to even odder strategies. Historical accounts from Scandinavian villages mention people eating fire cakes, flatbreads made with rye flour, water, and ashes from the hearth. The ash wasn't just filler, it was thought to carry the warmth of the fire into the body. In some mountain regions, warm stones were placed in bowls, and thin broths were poured over them so the meal would steam with the spirit of heat. And then there were the herbal remedies. Monks, alchemists, and healers across medieval Europe concocted warming tonics from ingredients that sound more like spells than recipes. Powdered amber, nutmeg, saffron, or dragon's blood resin mixed with honey. These were said to fortify the heart against the cold. Though modern medicine might dismiss such claims, there's something deeply human about them. the instinct to turn the natural world into comfort. To sip something mysterious and believe warmth will follow. Ultimately, these old recipes and rituals weren't just about survival. They were about reassurance. A bowl of hot stew, a sip of sweet wine, or a shared pot of bubbling broth was more than food. It was hope made tangible. When storms raged outside and snow crept under the door, warmth wasn't just in the hearth. It was in the taste, the company, and the small, beautiful act of sharing something hot with another soul. Section 6. Homes of Heat. How people built warmth into their walls. If we could step back 1,000 or 2,000 years and walk through a village in the heart of winter, we'd be struck not just by the biting wind, but by how people had learned to trap warmth like a secret inside their homes. In an age without central heating or double-glazed windows, warmth wasn't something you could summon. It was something you built. Every stone, every thatch, and every carefully placed animal hide was part of an ancient equation: how to keep the cold out and the heart of the home alive. In the ancient world, architecture was the first line of defense against the elements. The Romans, ever the engineers, were among the first to master indoor heating. They invented the hypocaust system, a remarkable innovation for its time. A kind of early underfloor heating used in bathhouses and the homes of the wealthy. Hot air from a wood-burning furnace was funneled through hollow spaces beneath floors and within walls, gently warming the room above. To walk barefoot on a hypocaust floor was to feel luxury itself, a silent, invisible fire moving through stone and clay. But for most people, warmth was a much simpler affair: a single hearth, a low ceiling, and thick walls of earth or stone to hold in the day's heat. In colder regions, like Northern Europe, homes were built to hug the heat. Early medieval longhouses were cleverly designed to combine living quarters with stables under one roof. The body heat of animals, cows, sheep, goats, rose through the air and mingled with the warmth of the hearth, creating a surprisingly comfortable atmosphere, albeit one rich in smell and noise. Archaeological studies in Scandinavia show that Viking homes often had only one small window, sometimes none at all, and were lined inside with wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks, mud, straw, and animal dung. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. The organic materials sealed in warmth and kept icy winds at bay. Meanwhile, in the dark highlands of Scotland and Ireland, ancient families lived in crannogs, wooden huts built on stilts over lakes, and brocks, round stone towers with double walls filled with rubble and turf for insulation. Fires were kept burning at all hours, their smoke curling up through thatched roofs and blackening the rafters. People didn't mind. The smoke kept insects away and helped preserve the thatch. In fact, smoky interiors were often warmer. The haze acted as a primitive barrier, slowing heat loss through the open roof. Across the sea in Asia, warmth was treated as both a physical and spiritual necessity. In Japan, homes featured the irori, a sunken hearth in the floor, surrounded by tatami mats. The smoke from the irori didn't just heat the room, it drifted upward, darkening wooden beams and strengthening them over time, a happy accident of chemistry and tradition. Families would gather around it each night, cooking, eating, and even sleeping nearby. Over in Korea, the ingenious ondol system provided radiant floor heat by channeling smoke from the kitchen hearth under a network of stone flues before it escaped through a chimney. The result was a perfectly warm floor, simple, effective, and comforting in ways that modern heating systems can only imitate. In the vast steppes of Central Asia, nomads had their own clever approach. The yurt, or ger, was a masterpiece of portable insulation. Its circular frame of wooden ribs was covered with thick layers of felt made from sheep's wool, which trapped air and held heat incredibly well. At the center burned a small iron stove, its pipe poking through a hole in the roof. The circular shape minimized heat loss and maximized social closeness. People slept and cooked in one shared warm space, the very air smelling of smoke, milk, and wool. Even in the freezing nights of the Mongolian winter, the inside of a yurt could stay cozy enough to make you forget the wind outside howled at 40 below. Elsewhere, warmth wasn't only about walls, it was about what filled them. In many medieval homes, insulation was a patchwork of whatever the earth or the barn could offer: moss, straw, wool, even dried seaweed. Wealthier families lined walls with tapestries, heavy fabrics that not only displayed wealth, but tracked air and kept out drafts. Imagine stepping into a grand hall lit by flickering torches, the walls shimmering with woven scenes of nights and forests, the cloth gently rippling as it soaked in the fire's heat. Even beauty itself became part of the battle against the cold. In some regions, people relied on living insulation, literally. During harsh winters, it was common for extended families to sleep together in one large room, sometimes even sharing the same bed. Historical accounts from medieval France and Germany describe family beds where parents, children, and sometimes servants huddled under a mountain of wool and fur. Privacy was scarce, but warmth was plenty. In poorer homes, it wasn't unusual for people to sleep alongside livestock, especially newborn animals. The heat of a calf or a dog could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. Of course, there were also creative improvisations that might seem odd to us now. Some medieval Europeans stuffed their clothing with straw or lined their shoes with wool scraps before stepping into icy streets. In Eastern Europe, people used hay beds, piles of dried grass layered between cloths, which emitted a faint warmth from the slow decomposition of the plant material beneath. In the Alps, villagers used heated stones, taken from the hearth and wrapped in cloth, to pre-warm beds or carry under cloaks. Those little glowing stones were the medieval equivalent of hot water bottles, and they worked astonishingly well. And through it all, there was a shared understanding across cultures. Warmth wasn't a luxury. It was a form of life itself. It was woven into architecture, shared among families, whispered into rituals and construction alike. To build a warm home wasn't just a matter of survival, it was an act of love, ingenuity, and connection to the world. When the wind wailed and the night froze, ancient people didn't just endure. They built warmth into their homes, into their stories, and into one another. Section 7. Wrapped in Survival. Ancient clothing tricks to keep warm. When the first breath of winter swept across the ancient world, people turned not only to their fires and homes for warmth, but to the layers they wrapped around their bodies, the silent armor of survival. To dress for winter wasn't about fashion or elegance. It was about endurance, ingenuity, and sometimes pure desperation. Every fold of fabric, every animal hide, every little detail of ancient winterwear told a story of how human creativity could tame the cold when nature offered no mercy. Imagine standing in a snow-covered field 2,000 years ago. The wind cuts through the air like a blade, biting the skin, numbing the fingers. Yet, in front of you, a shepherd moves with quiet calm, wrapped in thick wool, his body hidden under heavy layers of cloth, animal skins, and perhaps even grass stuffed beneath his tunic for extra insulation. What looks crude to us was brilliant to him. Wool was, of course, the great hero of ancient winters. Civilizations from Greece to Mesopotamia revered sheep not just for food or trade, but for their miraculous fleece, nature's most reliable heater. Wool fibers trap pockets of air, keeping the body warm even when damp, and this property made it more valuable than gold during harsh seasons. The Greeks wore chitons and Himytinian cloaks made of wool, draped and layered in countless ways depending on weather and status. In the colder mountain regions of Greece, shepherds crafted melotes, cloaks made of whole sheepskins with the wool still on, a garment so warm that even warriors wore it while on night watch. In ancient Rome, fashion evolved with practicality. The Romans introduced layered garments like the tunica, a kind of inner shirt, over which came the toga or painula, a heavy hooded cloak made from thick wool or sometimes felt. The wealthiest citizens lined their cloaks with fur from hares, foxes, or even imported animals from faraway provinces. Meanwhile, soldiers on the frontier adopted more northern designs, such as the sagum, a coarse, tightly woven wool cloak pinned over one shoulder. This cloak could double as a blanket at night and even as a makeshift tent when needed. When Roman legions camped in icy Britain or Germania, that sagum meant survival. Travel farther north, and you meet people who faced cold in a different league, the ancient Germans, Celts, and Norse. These were masters of functional warmth. The Celts invented bracae, early woolen trousers that shocked Roman sensibilities. Romans found the idea of men wearing pants barbaric, until they realized just how practical they were in freezing conditions. The Norse took it further. They wore layered tunics, undergarments of soft linen, and outer layers of thick wool. Furs lined their cloaks, boots, and even hats, often crafted from reindeer, bear, or wolf pelts. Archaeological finds from Viking settlements show garments woven with an ingenious mix of materials: wool for warmth, linen for comfort, and leather for strength. Their clothing was so well designed that even in the Arctic chill of Scandinavia, they could sail, work, and fight without succumbing to frostbite. In the East, the ancient Chinese developed a different philosophy of winter wear, one of structure and layering rather than bulk. They favored silk, surprisingly effective at trapping heat due to its tightly woven fibers. During the Han Dynasty, nobles and scholars layered silk robes upon silk robes, each adding a thin layer of insulation. For the common folk, padded cotton and hemp replaced silk, quilted into garments called mianyi. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Chinese perfected the art of quilting centuries before Europe, using multiple stitched layers to trap air. A well-made quilted robe could turn back the bite of a northern wind while maintaining a graceful, almost floating elegance. Meanwhile, in the snowy mountains of the Himalayas and Central Asia, warmth was life. The ancient Tibetans wore robes of yak wool and fur, enormous and heavy, wrapped around their bodies and tied at the waist. The sleeves were deliberately long, so hands could retreat inside, and the thick collar could be pulled up to protect the face. Nomads of the steppes wore felt boots, layered with fur on the inside, and sometimes stuffed with dried grass for extra insulation, a clever trick shared by indigenous Arctic peoples as well. Even in Siberia, early tribes learned to combine reindeer hide and fish skin. Yes, fish skin, to make flexible, waterproof, and astonishingly warm clothing. In the Islamic world, where desert nights could be brutally cold, Ancient travelers and merchants relied on burnous, long hooded cloaks woven from camel hair or wool. The loose, flowing design allowed for airflow during the day, but trapped body heat when the temperature dropped at night. It was clothing perfectly adapted to extreme environments, the kind of innovation that came from centuries of watching and listening to the wind. But even with all this ingenuity, not everyone had the luxury of fine wool or fur. In medieval Europe, peasants did what they could, layering coarse wool over linen, tying cloth around their legs for warmth, and wearing multiple hoods or cowls. In the poorest regions, some even lined their shoes with moss or hay, a natural insulator that could keep feet from freezing solid during long days of labor. Others heated small bricks or stones in the fire and tucked them into pockets or boots before heading out into the cold. Perhaps the most ingenious and endearing example of all comes from the Middle Ages, the chamber hood or nightcap, worn to bed to keep the head warm. Since most body heat escapes from the scalp, this simple item made an enormous difference. In drafty stone castles or mud cottages, a warm cap could be the line between comfort and shivering through the night. Every stitch, every fur, every woven layer across the centuries spoke of human persistence, of people who refused to let the cold dictate their fate. From silk-clad emperors to straw-stuffed farmers, all found ways to fight winter's grip using what they had and what they knew. And maybe that's the most remarkable thing of all. No matter the time or place, people always manage to wrap themselves not just in clothing, but in creativity, in resilience, and in the quiet warmth of being alive. Section 8: Fire, Fat, and Folklore. Strange ancient methods of staying warm. Before the crackling hearths and cozy blankets of modern life, warmth was not a given, it was a triumph. In the ancient world, staying warm was a battle of creativity and superstition. People turned to anything that might keep the chill away, from sacred fire rituals to rubbing their bodies with animal fat, even invoking mystical charms believed to heat the soul. Each strange method reveals how deeply humans feared and revered the cold, treating it not just as discomfort, but as a living, hostile force to be defeated. Let's begin with fire, the oldest and most sacred companion of humankind. For thousands of years, fire was more than a source of heat. It was a god, a guardian, a symbol of survival. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hestia represented the hearth, and every household kept her flame alive. To let it go out was not just inconvenient, it was sacrilege. The flame burned continuously, offering both physical and spiritual warmth. Similarly, in ancient Rome, the Vestal virgins guarded the sacred fire of Vesta. It was believed that as long as the fire burned, the city would remain safe. If it ever went out, coldness, both literal and cosmic, would creep in. Fire to ancient peoples was life itself. Nomadic tribes carried embers wrapped in moss or bark, smoldering slowly so they could reignite their fires each night. Some cultures even performed fire renewal rituals at the turn of the year, extinguishing all flames in the village, then lighting a new, pure fire from sacred wood to symbolize rebirth and warmth returning to the world. In medieval Europe, bonfires blazed during winter festivals like Yule, their smoke believed to drive away cold spirits and sickness. But not everyone could rely on fire alone. For those living on frozen plains or in windswept mountains, fire was precious and fleeting. So they turned to other, far stranger methods. In the Arctic, early peoples discovered that animal fat, thick, greasy, and enduring, was nature's miracle insulator. The Inuit and Chukchi rub seal or whale fat directly onto their skin to prevent frostbite. The oil sealed pores and created a layer that trapped body heat, much like a modern wetsuit. In some Siberian tribes, hunters would even coat their faces with bear grease before heading into the cold, believing it gave them not just warmth, but also the bear's strength. Across the ancient world, this practice appeared in unexpected places. The Celts mixed animal fat with herbs to create a kind of warming salve, while medieval peasants in northern Europe used lard or tallow as a cheap alternative to oil or lotion. Soldiers and travelers sometimes smeared grease on their boots to soften leather and seal out moisture, but when the cold became unbearable, they would rub it into their legs and hands too. It wasn't pleasant, and the smell was awful, but it worked. The Romans took things further still. Wealthy Romans indulged in heated oil baths, slathering themselves with olive oil before scraping it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. But for the poor, olive oil was too precious. Instead, they might mix animal fat with ashes or ground herbs to create a crude warming lotion. Some even believed certain oils carried mystical heat. Oil infused with cinnamon or myrrh was said to ignite the spirit and protect from winter chills. Then there were the warming drinks and potions, many of which teetered between medicine and magic. Ancient Chinese texts describe ginger and ginseng tonics used to stoke the inner fire. In medieval Europe, mulled wine, spiced ale, and fetid mead were drunk to warm the blood. But others believed warmth could come from within, through spiritual or mystical means. In parts of Eastern Europe and Russia, people wore charms or amulets shaped like suns or flames, believing these symbols radiated heat into the body. The ancient Egyptians, living mostly in heat, weren't as troubled by the cold, but even they had strange beliefs about warmth. They burned incense and resin, not just for scent, but to bring heat to the soul. Priests claimed that certain resins, frankincense, myrrh, or cedarwood, had the power to repel the cold of death. When mummifying the dead, they wrapped the body with these fragrant substances to ensure warmth in the afterlife. It was less about temperature and more about energy, warmth as a spiritual state. In medieval Europe, this belief lingered in odd superstitions. People believed that wearing red clothing brought warmth, because red was the color of vitality and heat. Some carried small stones called sun gems, usually amber, which they thought absorbed sunlight during the day and released warmth at night. Others trusted in witch charms, such as heating a small iron nail and wearing it around the neck. A dangerous idea, but one that shows just how desperate people were to fight the cold. One of the strangest winter traditions appeared in parts of Eastern Europe: sleeping with animals, literally. Peasants and shepherds would bring livestock indoors during the harshest nights, sharing heat with cows, sheep, or pigs. It wasn't romantic or ideal. The air was thick and the smell unforgettable, but body heat from even a single animal could mean survival when temperatures dropped below freezing. Some medieval chroniclers even wrote of entire families sleeping beside oxen or donkeys, using straw as bedding, the beast's breath warming the air like a living furnace. And then there were rituals of the absurd, moments when desperation became almost theatrical. In the mountains of ancient Italy, villagers held warming dances, stomping and twirling around fires, chanting to awaken the sun. In parts of northern Japan, farmers performed torch festivals, running through the fields with blazing sticks to chase away winter's spirit. Even in the frozen north of Russia, people would bathe in icy rivers during midwinter, believing that by shocking their bodies with cold, they would awaken their inner heat, a ritual that still echoes today in certain Epiphany traditions. Through all of these customs, one thing becomes clear. Warmth was never taken for granted. It was not just a physical need, but a spiritual pursuit, an expression of hope, faith, and ingenuity. People didn't only seek to warm their bodies, they sought to keep their spirits alive through the cold. Fire was their light in darkness, fat was their armor, folklore was their comfort, and together, these strange practices formed a truth that still resonates today, that warmth, at its core, is something we create not just from flame or fur, but from our own determination to survive. Section 9. Stone, Earth, and Ingenuity. How ancient architecture kept the cold at bay. Long before central heating and insulated windows, warmth was built. Literally. In a world where the cold could kill, ancient architects and common folk alike turned to the materials around them. Stone, mud, thatch, and even the earth itself, to craft homes that held the precious gift of heat. Each wall, floor, and hearth told a story of survival, shaped not by luxury, but by the unrelenting need to endure winter's bite. To understand ancient warmth, we must start with the earth itself, humanity's oldest shelter. Across the world, people discovered that the ground could offer a constant temperature, insulating them from both heat and cold. In ancient Turkey, the city of Derinkuyu was carved deep into the rock, descending more than 18 stories underground. It wasn't just a place of refuge from invaders. It was a warm haven in the freezing Anatolian winters. Beneath the surface, temperatures remained steady year-round, around 13 degrees Celsius, a perfect shield against the extremes of the world above. This principle, that the earth itself could protect and preserve warmth, was mirrored elsewhere. The Cappadocian cave dwellings, also in Turkey, were honeycombed into volcanic rock, where families lived alongside animals in soft, hollowed chambers. In China, similar structures called yaodongs, cave homes dug into low hillsides, have been used for thousands of years and are still inhabited today. Their thick earthen walls retain heat so efficiently that even during icy northern winters, a small clay stove could keep the space warm through the night. But not everyone lived beneath the earth. In the wind-swept plains of northern Europe, people built warmth from what they had: stone and thatch, shaped to resist the elements. Early Celtic and Norse dwellings were long, low, and tightly sealed, with a single central fire pit and a roof vent to let the smoke escape. Walls were often double-layered, stone outside, turf or moss inside, creating a primitive insulation. The smell of smoke lingered constantly, but the warmth was trapped, the fire's glow dancing on the rough walls as families huddled together in the flickering light. In medieval Scandinavia, warmth was a collective effort. Longhouses, vast wooden structures shared by families, servants, and livestock, became a cornerstone of northern survival. Cows and sheep were brought inside, not just for protection, but to share their body heat. The combined warmth of dozens of humans and animals could raise the interior temperature by several degrees. Beds were lined with fur, straw, or dried moss, and sometimes even hung from the rafters to avoid the cold drafts that crept along the floor. In contrast, the ancient Romans took warmth to a level of sophistication unmatched until modern times. They invented one of the earliest forms of central heating, the hypocaust system. Wealthy Roman villas featured raised floors supported by pillars, with hot air from a furnace flowing through the space below. The walls themselves often contained flues, hollow channels that guided heat upward, warming entire rooms from beneath. Baths, temples, and private homes glowed with this gentle underfloor heat, a marvel of ancient engineering. To step onto a Roman bathhouse floor on a cold morning was to feel luxury itself, warmth radiating from the stones, as steam curled around painted ceilings and marble columns. But even ordinary Romans found creative ways to stay warm. In simple insulae, apartment buildings made of brick and plaster, people burned charcoal braziers to heat small spaces. Wealthier households used portable metal heaters called focali, sometimes carried from room to room. The rich might even tuck warmed bricks or ceramic jars under their beds, an early version of the hot water bottle. Further east, in ancient China and Korea, architects developed their own ingenious systems. The Chinese Kang bed stove, a raised platform connected to a household stove, allowed heat from cooking fires to flow underneath sleeping and sitting areas. The ondol system of Korea worked much the same way, circulating hot air beneath stone floors, a design so effective that modern Korean homes still use it today. For families in those ancient winters, lying down on a heated stone platform, wrapped in layers of linen and fur, must have felt like resting on the sun itself. Of course, not all architectural warmth came from grand engineering. Some came from imagination. In Central Asia, nomads built yurts, circular felt tents stretched over wooden frames. The walls were made from layers of wool, often soaked in fat or milk to increase insulation. The interior was warmed by a single stove at the center, its pipe rising through the roof like a chimney. Despite the bitter cold of the steppes, a well-made yurt could remain cozy inside, even when the world outside froze solid. The circular shape prevented cold corners and allowed heat to circulate evenly. Inside, carpets and embroidered fabrics softened the space, turning survival into a kind of art. In other parts of the world, warmth was found in unexpected forms. The Inuit igloo, built from blocks of snow, might seem like the coldest place imaginable. But snow, surprisingly, is a superb insulator. Once inside, the warmth from a single oil lamp could raise the temperature to comfortable levels. The walls trapped body heat, and the curved dome allowed condensation to freeze into a protective glaze. In the eerie quiet of the Arctic night, an igloo was a glowing, crystalline sanctuary. Even in the deserts, where temperatures plummeted after sunset, architecture adapted to the dance between heat and cold. Ancient Persian builders designed badgirs, or wind towers, that captured cool air during the day and trapped warmth at night. Underground water channels, called qanats, carried moisture through stone tunnels, balancing the temperature inside homes. The mastery of thermal control was as much an art as it was survival. Every civilization, from the frozen north to the sun-scorched south, found its way to fight the cold through architecture, using what nature offered and what ingenuity could craft. From fire-warmed floors to animal-lined huts, from stone caves to wool-wrapped yurts, humanity built warmth into the very bones of its dwellings. The walls may have been rough, the air smoky, and the nights long, but the fire still burned and life endured. In the end, staying warm was not just about heat. It was about belonging, about creating a space where no matter how cruel the world outside became, there was always a hearth, a light, and the promise of tomorrow. Section 10. Fabrics, Furs, and Fashioned Warmth. How clothing became a personal heater. Long before the invention of synthetic insulation, humans relied on nature's gifts to keep themselves warm. Clothes were not merely for modesty or style, they were tools of survival, carefully chosen and layered to battle the coldest of winters. Every fabric, every stitch, and every layer carried a story of ingenuity and adaptation. In Northern Europe, people wore layers of wool and linen, often combining multiple garments to trap heat. Linen was light and breathable, perfect for a base layer, while wool, thick and dense, formed the outer layer, holding body heat close. Some garments were padded with extra wool or horsehair, almost like early quilted coats. The garments were often dyed with natural colors, but function was far more important than fashion. Cold winds, snow, and rain tested the strength and warmth of each thread. Fur was highly prized. Bear, fox, and rabbit pelts were used not only as coats, but also as linings for hoods, gloves, and boots. In Scandinavia, Vikings wrapped themselves in fur cloaks that reached the ground. The density of the fur trapped heat effectively, while the outer leather resisted moisture. These furs were often treated with oils or fats to make them water-resistant, a natural shield against sleet and snow. In ancient China, silk was used in an unexpected way. While silk is thin, it has unique thermal properties. It can trap a layer of air close to the body. Wealthy families layered silk under heavier garments, creating a combination of elegance and warmth. Sometimes silk clothing was padded with cotton or other fibers, adding additional insulation. Chinese boots, lined with felt, also helped keep feet warm during harsh winters, especially in northern regions. The ancient Romans had their own unique approach. Togas and cloaks were layered according to the season. While a light woolen tunic sufficed in mild weather, winter required the sagum, a heavy wool cloak, often draped and folded around the body multiple times. Soldiers marching through the cold along distant borders used leather and fur wraps, combined with woolen undergarments, to survive. Even the sandals worn in colder regions might be lined with animal skins to provide insulation. Beyond clothing, people invented handheld and portable warmth. Early humans carried small heated stones or ceramic vessels, tucked into their clothes or beds to provide localized warmth. In medieval Europe, warming pouches filled with hot coals were sometimes carried under layers of clothing. These portable heaters could be dangerous, but they allowed travelers and messengers to survive bitterly cold nights. Headgear was equally important. Hats, hoods, and caps were designed to prevent heat loss from the head. In Northern Europe, pointed woolen hoods, sometimes lined with fur, were worn. In China, embroidered silk caps offered elegance while insulating the skull. Gloves and mittens, often stuffed with fur, kept hands functional, and long socks or leggings extended warmth down to the toes. Even belts and sashes were sometimes padded or lined, adding yet another layer of protection. Some cultures got creative with layering. The Japanese, for example, used multiple kimono layers, each thin on its own, but together creating substantial warmth. In some cases, the inner layers were quilted or padded, while the outer layers were decorative. In northern climates, each layer could be removed or added depending on activity, offering both flexibility and insulation. People also used animal-based materials in unusual ways. Some communities stuffed clothes with dried grasses, moss, or wool to add bulk and heat retention. In Arctic regions, seal skins were sewn with the fur inside, creating natural, windproof, and waterproof layers. The combination of trapped air, body heat, and moisture resistance made these garments remarkably effective. Even shoes were carefully designed. Boots lined with fur, felt, or even straw allowed people to walk in snow without losing body heat. Sandals in warmer climates were sometimes worn with wool or cotton wrappings during winter. The concept of insoles made from animal hides or plant fibers was not new. People understood that insulating the feet could protect the entire body from cold. Special garments were often worn for sleeping as well. People layered woolen or fur wraps over their beds, sometimes sleeping fully clothed in layers to preserve heat through the night. In some cultures, heated bricks or stones were placed near the feet or tucked under the bedding. For those who could afford it, quilts and padded coverings added another dimension of warmth. Interestingly, fashion sometimes dictated practicality. In some societies, robes and cloaks were long and flowing, allowing the wearer to wrap themselves multiple times, almost like a wearable blanket. While this might seem cumbersome, it created micro-layers of trapped air, insulating the body. Belts, pins, and sashes not only held the garments in place, but also allowed the wearer to tighten layers, enhancing warmth. Children and infants received special attention. In colder climates, babies were swaddled in layers of wool and linen, often with fur caps and booties. The swaddling preserved heat and allowed infants to sleep without disturbance. Adults, too, sometimes layered their clothing tightly before venturing outside, understanding that movement alone might not generate enough heat during extreme conditions. Even royalty and the wealthy engaged in layering for warmth. In Europe, kings and queens wore multiple garments under their outer robes. Furs from exotic animals, often imported at great expense, lined cloaks and hats. In addition to keeping them warm, these layers demonstrated status and wealth, combining practicality with prestige. Through all of these methods, people demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. Every culture found ways to use natural materials, local resources, and clever layering techniques to survive cold seasons. The combination of fabrics, furs, and portable heat allowed humans to thrive, even in harsh climates, long before modern heating technology. Warmth was crafted, worn, and carried. It was a constant consideration in daily life, shaping not only fashion, but the very way people moved and slept. Across time and geography, clothing became a personal heater, a shield against the winter's relentless chill, and a testament to human resourcefulness. Section 11. Fires, braziers, and early heating devices. While clothing in layers were essential, humans have always sought external sources of warmth to survive cold winters. One of the oldest methods was the simple hearth. Fire has long been central to human life, not only for cooking, but for comfort and safety. In ancient homes, fire pits were often located in the center of living spaces, allowing heat to radiate outward. Smoke escaped through openings in the roof or walls, while the flames offered both light and warmth. In Northern Europe, longhouses often featured a central hearth surrounded by benches and bedding. Families would cluster around the fire, sharing warmth and reducing exposure to the cold stone or wooden floors. Smoke filled the house, which could be uncomfortable, but it had a practical purpose. The soot and smoke helped preserve the timber and deter insects. Sleeping near the fire was a common practice, and the radiant heat would help keep furs and blankets warm through the night. Braziers became popular in later periods. These were portable metal containers filled with hot coals or embers. People could carry braziers from room to room, providing temporary warmth where it was needed. In some cultures, braziers were placed on stone or wooden stands, allowing warmth to rise evenly into the space. While braziers could be dangerous if tipped or misused, they allowed more flexibility than a fixed hearth and were often used in larger homes or palaces. Romans had their own approach with hypocaust systems, a remarkable innovation. Wealthy households built hollow spaces under floors, which could be heated by furnaces, allowing warm air to rise through tiles and vents. This early form of central heating not only warmed rooms, but also helped dry damp walls and floors. Wealthy citizens enjoyed the luxury of heated baths and living spaces, demonstrating how architecture itself could contribute to comfort during cold months. In Asia, particularly in China and Korea, people developed ondol systems, a method of underfloor heating using heated stones or channels for hot air. Floors were often layered with stones or clay, which retained heat for long periods. Families slept directly on these floors, using mats or bedding, and could remain warm even in sub-zero temperatures. In Japan, similar principles applied with kotatsu tables, where a small heat source under the table kept feet and legs warm while seated. Even simple portable heat sources played a role. People used hot stones, bricks, or metal plates heated by fire, and then wrapped in cloth or placed under bedding. In some cultures, these were placed near the feet, where heat could radiate upward through blankets and layers. This technique allowed warmth to be concentrated where it was most needed. In rural areas or for travelers, such portable heaters were indispensable. In medieval Europe, chimneys began to change the way homes were heated. Previously, smoke had to escape through roof openings, but chimneys allowed fires to burn more efficiently and safely. Hearths became larger and more specialized, sometimes including iron grates and fire guards. Families would gather near the fire for cooking, crafting, and social activities, making warmth a central aspect of daily life. Ceramic or clay stoves were another innovation. These stoves could be filled with embers, retaining heat for hours, slowly radiating it into the room. In some homes, rooms were connected by flues or vents, allowing heat from one stove to spread to multiple spaces. This early engineering demonstrates that humans have long thought carefully about how to capture, store, and direct heat efficiently. People also developed customs and habits around fire. Sleeping arrangements often shifted in winter to maximize warmth. Families and animals sometimes shared sleeping quarters, taking advantage of body heat. In colder climates, homes were designed with small insulated rooms to trap warmth. Carpets, tapestries, and curtains were hung to reduce drafts and prevent heat loss through walls and windows. Even outside the home, portable heat was vital. Travelers carried small braziers or bundles of hot coals in containers to keep themselves warm on long journeys. Soldiers sometimes built small fires within their tents, balancing safety and heat. Merchants, artisans, and wanderers adapted to their environment, understanding that warmth was not only a comfort, but a matter of survival. In some cultures, the combination of heated spaces and layered clothing created a surprisingly comfortable environment. Even in extreme winters, people developed habits of pre-warming beds with hot stones, wearing layered garments to trap heat, and using portable heat sources strategically. Every design choice, every cultural adaptation was shaped by the need to survive cold weather. Even the wealthy used these systems creatively. Royal palaces, monasteries, and large homes integrated multiple heating sources. Some rooms were heated continuously, while others were warmed only when occupied. Ceremonial halls might have large braziers or fireplaces, creating both comfort and an impressive atmosphere. The design of furniture, carpets, and curtains often complemented heating methods, ensuring that warmth was distributed evenly. Humans also learned to maximize the efficiency of heat. In colder regions, kitchens served as warm areas not only for cooking, but for living and working. People clustered near stoves or ovens while performing daily tasks. Sleeping areas were sometimes located above kitchens or near hearths, taking advantage of rising heat. Even stairways and hallways were designed to channel warmth from one area to another. By combining architectural ingenuity, portable heating, and thoughtful clothing, people from all over the world survived winters that could have been deadly. The blend of science, resourcefulness, and cultural adaptation allowed communities to thrive in environments that today might seem harsh and unforgiving. Warmth was crafted, maintained, and cherished, an essential thread woven into the fabric of daily life. Section 12. Bedding, mattresses, and sleeping arrangements. While fires, braziers, and clothing provided essential warmth, humans also relied on clever sleeping arrangements and bedding to survive cold nights. The bed itself was a tool for insulation, layered with materials that trapped heat and created a cozy microenvironment. Across cultures, people experimented with different techniques, understanding that warmth was not only generated but preserved. In ancient Egypt, beds were elevated from the ground on wooden frames. A straw mattress was covered with linen sheets, and during colder nights, blankets of wool or animal skins were added. Raising the bed kept sleepers away from cold stone or dirt floors, while layered coverings trapped body heat. Wealthy Egyptians sometimes had beds lined with additional furs or decorative textiles, combining comfort and status. Romans had similarly innovative approaches. Wealthy families layered mattresses with feathers, wool, and straw. Linen sheets provided softness, while heavier woolen blankets added warmth. Some homes featured hypocaust systems under floors, so beds positioned above warm floors were especially cozy. The combination of soft, insulated bedding and radiant heat from below made winter nights bearable, even during bitter cold. In medieval Europe, mattresses were often stuffed with straw, hay, or feathers. People added extra layers in winter, sometimes placing dried grasses or moss beneath the straw to act as additional insulation. Bedding was often piled high, and beds were shared among family members to conserve heat. Curtains hung around beds further prevented drafts, creating a small, warm enclosure. The concept of the canopy bed was not only decorative but practical, helping trap warm air around sleepers. In northern Asia, sleeping arrangements were even more intricate. In Korea and China, floors were heated with ondol or kang systems, and bedding consisted of multiple mats and quilts layered on the heated floor. The warmth radiated evenly, allowing families to sleep comfortably despite frigid outdoor temperatures. Quilts were often padded with cotton or other fibers, which compressed slightly under the body, creating a snug, heat-retentive sleeping area. Some cultures developed rotating sleeping practices to maximize warmth. In Japan, futons were placed on heated floors or tatami mats. During extremely cold nights, futons were layered and even doubled over, providing extra insulation. Shared sleeping arrangements were common, where siblings or parents and children slept closely together to benefit from shared body heat. This practice, while simple, reflected an understanding of human physiology and heat conservation. Portable bedding solutions also existed for travelers. Nomadic communities carried lightweight mattresses stuffed with straw or wool, which could be easily rolled and transported. Furs, blankets, and mats were layered upon these portable beds to create temporary warm shelters. For soldiers, caravans, or merchants, these arrangements were essential, allowing short-term sleep without sacrificing warmth. Even infants received special attention. In many societies, babies were swaddled in layers of cloth, sometimes with fur or wool padding. Cradles and small beds were lined with blankets and animal skins, preserving heat and keeping young children comfortable. Parents recognized that infants were especially vulnerable to cold, and elaborate bedding techniques ensured survival. In colder climates, bedding often extended beyond the bed itself. Rugs, tapestries, and additional mats were placed on the floor to insulate against cold surfaces. People sometimes slept in slightly elevated positions, using pillows and folded blankets to raise themselves above drafts. Beds were positioned strategically near heat sources, such as fireplaces or braziers, to capture rising warmth. The materials themselves played a crucial role. Wool, feathers, straw, and furs all have unique insulating properties. Wool can retain heat even when damp, making it ideal for bedding. Feathers provide soft loft and trap air efficiently, while straw and moss act as affordable, natural insulation. Animal skins, often treated or cured, added a moisture-resistant barrier, protecting against cold drafts and damp floors. Even the structure of the bed mattered. Elevated platforms, thick mattresses, and enclosed canopies all contributed to warmth retention. Bed curtains, often lined with heavier fabrics, prevented heat from escaping and blocked cold drafts. People understood that a well-constructed bed could make the difference between a comfortable night and a bitterly cold one. In some cultures, bedding was seasonally adjusted. Lighter materials were used in summer, while winter demanded thick layers of insulation. People swapped blankets, added quilts, and even placed heated stones beneath bedding. Some traditions involved pre-warming the bed with hot water bottles or stones before sleep, creating a cozy environment ready for rest. Sleeping arrangements also reflected social and economic factors. Wealthier families could afford feather mattresses, multiple quilts, and heated floors, while the poor relied on straw, furs, and close body contact. Regardless of status, humans shared a fundamental understanding. Warmth during sleep was essential for survival. Through a combination of bedding innovation, layered textiles, and strategic placement, people survived harsh winters without modern heating. Their ingenuity transformed simple beds into sophisticated tools of insulation, blending comfort, warmth, and safety. The way people slept 2,000 years ago reveals a delicate balance between resourcefulness and daily life, showing that warmth was not only sought, but carefully engineered in every layer, every material, and every placement. Section 13. Communal sleeping and social strategies for warmth. Beyond bedding and portable heat, people in ancient times often relied on communal sleeping as a practical strategy to conserve warmth. In many cultures, sharing a sleeping space allowed multiple bodies to combine heat, creating a small, warm microenvironment that could endure the chill of winter nights. This practice was not only functional, but also deeply tied to social structures and family life. In medieval Europe, it was common for entire families to sleep in a single room or even on a single bed during the coldest months. Parents, children, and sometimes extended relatives huddled together, using shared blankets and furs. This practice conserved precious heat and reduced the need for multiple fire sources, especially in homes where fuel was scarce. The proximity of bodies allowed warmth to circulate naturally, ensuring that even infants and the elderly remained comfortable. Communal sleeping was also observed in ancient Asia. In Japan, families often slept together on futons laid side by side on tatami mats. The heat retained in the layered futons and mats, combined with close body contact, created a surprisingly warm sleeping surface. Similarly, in Korea, families used ondol heated floors as a base for sleeping together, maximizing the effectiveness of the radiant warmth and minimizing heat loss. The closeness of family members was both practical and comforting, reinforcing social bonds while keeping everyone warm. In some northern cultures, such as among the Vikings, longhouses were designed with communal sleeping areas along the sides of the hall. The central hearth provided heat to the entire space, and people slept on raised platforms or benches along the walls. This arrangement allowed heat from the fire to rise and circulate efficiently, warming the bodies of those sleeping nearby. Even in harsh, cold climates, the combination of shared space and centralized fire ensured that winter nights were survivable. Communal sleeping was not limited to family units. In rural areas or villages, young workers, apprentices, or travelers often shared dormitory-style sleeping quarters. Inns and hostels in ancient times provided large rooms with multiple beds or mats, encouraging social warmth. People quickly learned to adapt to shared sleeping conditions, layering their own blankets over those of neighbors to trap heat and reduce drafts. This cooperative approach to warmth reflected both human ingenuity and social necessity. Animals often played a role in communal sleeping. In many societies, domesticated animals were brought indoors during winter. Horses, dogs, goats, or cats provided additional warmth, either by sleeping near humans or by sharing bedding. The combination of human and animal body heat helped insulate rooms and reduce the reliance on fire, especially in rural or resource-limited settings. This blending of humans, animals, and bedding created a naturally warm environment that could sustain life during extreme cold. In wealthier households, communal sleeping was combined with architectural innovations. Bedrooms might have been placed directly above kitchens or near central hearths, allowing families to benefit from residual heat from cooking fires. Canopy beds or curtained sleeping areas concentrated warmth, creating pockets of comfort within larger rooms. Even in palaces or manors, social sleeping practices were carefully orchestrated to balance warmth, privacy, and security. Cultural rituals often accompanied communal sleeping. For example, In some societies, children and younger siblings were deliberately placed between adults or near the warmest side of a room, ensuring they remained safe and comfortable. Storytelling, song, and conversation often accompanied these nighttime gatherings, creating both physical warmth and psychological comfort. The combination of heat and companionship fostered a sense of security during the long, dark winter nights. Travelers and nomads also relied heavily on communal sleeping. In tents or temporary shelters, people slept close together, sharing blankets, furs, or mats. Sleeping arrangements were carefully planned so that heat from the group could be shared evenly. In some cases, people positioned their bodies strategically to reduce exposure to drafts, using human warmth as a natural barrier against the cold. Communal sleeping also extended to workforces and armies. Soldiers, laborers, and apprentices often slept in large shared quarters. By clustering bodies and layering bedding, groups minimized the need for multiple fires or heating devices. These practices reflected both pragmatism and an understanding of thermal physics. Heat naturally rises and circulates among bodies, keeping the group warm collectively. The psychological benefits of communal warmth were just as important as the physical ones. Human contact reduces stress and provides comfort, which in turn supports better sleep and health. Families and groups that shared sleeping spaces benefited from both body heat and emotional warmth. These ancient practices show that survival in winter was as much about cooperation and social ingenuity as it was about material innovation. Even in modest homes, people experimented with layering, positioning, and combining resources. Shared blankets, strategically placed mats, and clustered sleeping positions demonstrated that warmth was a priority in design, not an afterthought. People observed patterns of cold, heat retention, and airflow, adapting their sleeping arrangements seasonally to ensure that every night could be endured safely. In essence, communal sleeping exemplifies the blend of practicality, culture, and human adaptability. By sharing warmth, families and communities could survive harsh winters without modern heating, relying on cooperation, knowledge of materials, and an intuitive understanding of how heat moves. Every layer of bedding, every body pressed together, every curtain drawn was part of a careful strategy to endure the cold while maintaining comfort, safety, and social connection. The ingenuity and thoughtfulness evident in these sleeping practices remind us that humans have long been capable of extraordinary adaptations, combining science, culture, and social behavior to create warmth in even the harshest climates. Section 14. Clothing for sleep and warmth. While bedding and communal sleeping were central to staying warm, clothing specifically designed for sleep played an equally important role. Across ancient cultures, people developed garments to retain body heat during the long nights, understanding that the right materials and designs could make a significant difference between comfort and discomfort. In medieval Europe, it was common for people to sleep in long nightshirts, usually made from linen. Linen was soft and breathable, making it ideal for comfort, but it was often layered with woolen garments during winter. Wealthier families might have added embroidered or quilted layers, which provided extra warmth while also showcasing status. Nightcaps were a common accessory, designed to cover the head, which loses heat quickly, and protect ears from the cold. In northern climates, woolen nightcaps were often stuffed lightly with straw or other insulating materials. This design not only retained heat, but also cushioned the head, preventing cold drafts from causing discomfort. In some cultures, children and adults alike wore full body wraps or cloaks while sleeping, especially when bedding was minimal. These garments could be removed in the morning, but were essential for surviving icy nights. In Japan, sleeping clothing was both practical and simple. Families used lightweight robes or kimonos made from cotton or hemp. During colder months, additional layers were added, sometimes lined with wool or layered over padded bedding. The loose fit allowed for movement during sleep while ensuring that the body remained insulated. Some households even had special winter sleeping robes that were thicker and more padded than everyday clothing. In ancient China, people used silk garments for sleeping, especially among wealthier families. Silk, while thin, trapped a surprising amount of warmth when layered. In colder months, silk robes were supplemented with cotton or wool padding. Sleeves and collars were designed to cover the body snugly, reducing heat loss while maintaining flexibility and comfort. Foot coverings or socks were also common, as toes are particularly vulnerable to cold. Egyptians had unique sleepwear traditions. Light linen nightshirts were common due to the warmer climate, but during the rare cold nights, additional coverings were used. Wealthy families sometimes lined their bedding with wool or animal skins, and these layers were combined with thin night garments to maintain comfort. Head coverings were less common in hot climates, but were used when temperatures dropped unexpectedly. Clothing for warmth often extended beyond practicality to ritual or symbolic purposes. In some cultures, particular garments were thought to protect the sleeper from spirits or negative influences during the night. These beliefs intersected with practical warmth, as additional layers naturally increased insulation. Night clothes could be embroidered with protective symbols or dyed with colors considered auspicious. The materials themselves were carefully chosen. Wool, linen, silk, and cotton each had unique properties. Wool retained heat effectively, even when slightly damp. Cotton provided softness and breathability. Silk added lightweight insulation, and linen offered comfort and a barrier against drafts. People often combined materials, layering linen nightshirts under wool cloaks or over silk undergarments, creating a versatile and adaptive system for warmth. Special attention was given to extremities. Hats, hoods, and socks were common, especially in Northern Europe. The head, hands, and feet lose heat rapidly, so covering these areas was critical. Some cultures even devised split-toe socks or padded gloves for sleeping, ensuring that all parts of the body stayed warm throughout the night. Seasonal adaptation was a recurring theme. Garments were lighter in summer and heavier in winter, often layered in increments so that sleepers could adjust comfort during the night. Portable warmth, such as heated stones wrapped in cloth, could be incorporated with sleep clothing to provide additional heat, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of human comfort and survival. In shared sleeping arrangements, clothing also served a social function. Families coordinated layers so that everyone remained equally warm. Children were often placed between adults, and garments could be shared or passed down, ensuring protection for the most vulnerable. Even in communal or crowded sleeping quarters, thoughtful clothing choices helped maintain warmth efficiently. The combination of sleepwear, bedding, and strategic body positioning reveals a careful orchestration of comfort, health, and survival. People understood that clothing was not merely decorative, but essential for endurance in cold environments. They balanced material properties, layering techniques, and social strategies to create optimal conditions for rest. Through these garments, humans 2,000 years ago demonstrated ingenuity, combining practicality, comfort, and adaptability. From linen nightshirts in Egypt to padded woolen robes in Europe and layered silk in China, the variety of sleepwear shows a global appreciation for warmth and a sophisticated understanding of human needs during sleep. Section 15. Extreme Winter Strategies. In addition to bedding, communal sleeping, and specialized clothing, people in ancient times often developed extreme strategies to stay warm during the harshest winter months. These methods were sometimes unusual, creative, and even a little surprising, showing the lengths humans went to endure cold nights. In Northern Europe, some families built sleeping platforms directly above cooking fires. These platforms were elevated wooden structures or lofts, allowing heat from the fire below to rise naturally. While this required careful supervision to prevent accidents, it created a consistently warm sleeping space. The gentle heat from the fire could warm the entire platform, reducing the need for heavy blankets or multiple layers of clothing. In Scandinavia, longhouses sometimes incorporated heated stones or bricks. People would heat large stones in the central hearth and then place them under bedding or near sleeping mats. The residual heat from these stones could last for hours, providing warmth throughout the night. In some cases, stones were wrapped in cloth or straw to prevent burns and to create a more even distribution of heat. Nomadic tribes in cold regions often relied on animal skins and body heat in tandem. They would layer furs on the ground, cover themselves with additional skins, and sometimes sleep very close together, pressing bodies against each other for warmth. Dogs, cats, or other domesticated animals were often included in this arrangement, contributing additional heat. In this way, humans and animals worked together to create a natural, insulating microclimate. In Japan, tatami mats played an important role in extreme cold. Families would layer multiple mats and futons, sometimes 3 or 4, thick, creating a padded and insulated sleeping surface. Additional coverings, like quilts or woven blankets, provided extra warmth. The combination of materials trapped air, slowed heat loss, and allowed families to sleep comfortably even during bitter winters. Ancient Chinese households sometimes used small charcoal or coal braziers, placing them carefully near sleeping areas. These were designed to radiate heat without overwhelming the room with smoke. Special attention was paid to airflow and safety, ensuring warmth while preventing accidental fires. Bedding could be arranged around these braziers, allowing the heat to circulate gently and consistently. In some European regions, heated water bottles or pouches filled with hot stones were used. People would place them near feet or along the sides of beds to maintain localized warmth. These simple methods were surprisingly effective and widely practiced before the invention of modern heating systems. Children often had extra small heated pouches tucked near them for added comfort. Beyond objects and bedding, humans also adapted behaviorally. People timed their sleep to coincide with warmer parts of the night, or adjusted room configurations to minimize drafts. Windows might be covered with cloth or leather, and doors kept closed to trap heat within sleeping areas. Simple adjustments like these could dramatically improve comfort. Even in extreme winter, social cooperation was crucial. Families, villages, and communal groups coordinated sleeping arrangements, so that warmth was distributed efficiently. Vulnerable members, such as children and the elderly, were often placed in the warmest positions. Knowledge of these practices was passed down through generations, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of survival in cold environments. The ingenuity of these ancient strategies shows that humans were remarkably adaptive. By combining clothing, bedding, body heat, architectural design, and behavioral adjustments, people could sleep through cold nights with a surprising degree of comfort. These methods reflect a blend of practical science, social cooperation, and cultural tradition, all aimed at preserving warmth and well-being. Modern readers might be surprised by the creativity and diversity of these solutions. Heated stones, sleeping over fires, layered futons, communal arrangements, and even animal companions all played essential roles in survival. While primitive compared to modern heating systems, these strategies were effective and often ingeniously simple. As we conclude this journey into the past, it becomes clear that sleeping practices 2,000 years ago were not only about rest, but about survival, comfort, and human connection. Each night, people combined resources, knowledge, and social bonds to endure cold, darkness, and long winters. They developed methods that were practical, innovative, and deeply tied to their cultural context. So tonight, as you prepare for sleep, remember that humans have always sought warmth and comfort. Whether through shared blankets, layered clothing, heated stones, or close body contact, our ancestors demonstrated creativity and care. Their strategies may seem unusual today, but they reflect timeless human ingenuity and the desire for safe, restful sleep. May your night be calm, your bed warm, and your dreams gentle. Sleep well,